This is a real honor for me. I've known Kenny since about 1970. For those of you who might know what I did, I started a club called Tulagis on the Hill in 1970 and started booking national bands in the early Tulagis. And to be very honest, I couldn't get my career going without this guy over here, and I'll tell you that very honestly. I would pick his brain about music. He was working at KRNW, and I would find out about an act, and I'd get a record and play it for him, and we both decide if we liked it. I remember those days, KRNW, which was KBCO before it became KBCO, for those of you who weren't around in those days, it was free-form radio. They would play anything they wanted, which was great. It was the world of great radio. And I would literally hear, I had a band called Bumpy Action that played for me at the Lodges. You remember that?
No, but what is
it?
Oh,
he's just like the name.
From Omaha, Nebraska. And they came in and said, we just played with this great little young kid guitarist named Leo Kotke, who was from Minneapolis, and you ought to get his record because you ought to book him here at Tulagis. And I went over to the record center. Chucky Weiss, whose family owned it, I went over there and bought a Leo Kotke record, fell in love with Leo. And of course, what I would do that day is drive down to KRNW, open the record up for Michael Kennicott or Michael Muirhead or Kenny Weissberg or any of the guys that worked there. Usually put out a big line of illegal drugs. Said, you guys will like this and you probably should play it. And they would play it, and I booked Leo Kotke, and he sold out the first time we ever brought him in. I've been working with Leo as his manager now for 40 years, so we still are associated with him. Two old guys still working together. But it was a great time for radio. It was a great time for music. Kenny was such a big part of it. Between Cake Eaters, his wonderful magazine that was Westward before Westward was alive, what he did on the radio playing great music, what he did in writing stories. He was one of those great people. I have finished the book. I got an early copy from Kenny, and it is brilliant. Absolutely, I could not put it down. So for those of you who bought a copy tonight or are going to go read it, or haven't bought a copy tonight, I really suggest you buy it. But Kenny has been an inspiration to me. I know it's usually people think it's the other way around, but honestly, he has been a sounding board for me in my music career. Hopefully I've helped him a little through his music career, but it really, I count on him, I think, more than he's ever counted on me. So without further ado, I'd like to bring up my old friend of 40 years, Kenny Weissberg. Woo!
How's the sound?
That's good.
Yeah. Great. Wow. Is there anyone in this room that I don't personally know?
Did anybody raise their hand?
I recognize people from the music community, the radio community, writers, fine arts community. Just unbelievable. Thank you. Have to take it all in.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Okay, take it in.
Thank you, Chuck Morris, to Tulagi, Ebbets Field, the Rainbow Music Hall, nearly 40 years of shows at Red Rocks, McNichols, Pepsi Center, Mile High Stadium, Folsom Field, and his career-defining achievement, promoting women's roller derby in Broomfield. And is there anyone in here tonight that's not my Facebook friend? G. Brown.
I'm unfriending you.
So, just Facebook me at the end of the night, and I definitely want to see your grandchildren. I want to see all your kids. We're going to talk a little tonight, then we're going to do a little question and answer thing, then I'll sign books. This is a homecoming for me. I hope I keep it together. I grew up in South Orange, New Jersey, with a couple of people you can't see. A couple of people are here, my friends David and Kenny, who Kenny flew out from New York to surprise me last night. And David is a world champion hot air balloonist, and we were all in kindergarten together. And for them to be here 60 years later is very special. Tell me if the mic goes bad, let me know. I moved west in 1,000-mile increments. I went to college in Madison, Wisconsin for 4 years, and then I wanted to have a non-winter, so I spent a year in Santa Barbara where I played basketball, I played guitar, I audited poetry courses, and really embarrassed my parents by not having a job. And I went back to New Jersey thinking that my father was going to get me a job on the stock exchange. But music was in my blood from age 7, and I decided that I couldn't stay in New Jersey anymore. No offense to you Jerseyites over here. So I came out with a couple of friends, 2 couples, and we were going to Homestead in Oregon, which is a kind of a euphemism for growing pot and raising horses. And we got as far as the Black Hills of South Dakota, and I realized, wow, it's me driving my baby blue Ford Econoline van, and I can't be with these 2 couples anymore. They were fighting one night, they were making love the next, and I'm sleeping in the back of the van going like this, and just losing my mind. So in the Black Hills, we sat around the campfire, and I said, I have to drop you guys somewhere. I know it's my car, I'm leaving you in the lurch. And we took out the map, and 500 miles south, approximately, is Boulder, Colorado. So we came to Boulder and fell in love with it immediately. A lot of people told me when I got here, at age 23, by the way, now I'm on Medicare and Social Security, but I was 23 when I got here, and people said it's a very cliquish city, and it's a college town. Unless you're with the university, you're not going to make it unless you're involved in something professional, like IBM was big here, or I don't know, some of the computer companies were starting up back then. So I said, well, what am I going to do? And so I went to Tulagi. I mean, literally, I spent every night there. I wrote down a couple of the acts that I saw there. It was just unbelievable. I mean, it would be Muddy Waters one night, Dr. Merle Watson the next night, Earl Scruggs, Taj Mahal, Bonnie Raitt. Chuck brought in the Eagles when they were called Eagle. For 5 nights in December of 1971, I was there every night. G. Brown was the bartender, I think. Is that true back then?
3-2 beer.
3-2 beer. And so I said, I don't care if I ever find a job, I'm going to stay here and go to Pilates every night. Which literally I did. And then one day I ran into a KR, does anyone remember KRNW? Wow, you're really old. I ran into their morning guy, Jason Sherman, who is actually in the audience tonight. Hi, Jason. Thank you for coming. We sat down. We drank copious amounts of 3-2 beer. And in between bathroom pit stops, we got to know each other. Jason, I've written a lot about him in this book. He was very important in my early days in Boulder. Sort of took me under his wing. Of course, to get my first radio job, I told Jason that I had 4 years of college experience, and that I had worked as a volunteer at a radio station in Santa Barbara. And the truth is that I had never even been inside of a radio station. Never even seen one. And so Jason, I told him that finally last year. After 40 years.
All along, I'm sure. No.
So Jason said, there might be a room for a fill-in. You could come down and fill in. And I went down there, and this is in the book, so I'm not going to really tell the whole story. In fact, I wonder if that's one of the things I was going to read. I decided, after marking all these things to read, that maybe I won't read. No, I might read it, because it's pretty interesting. It's really well written. What is it? Like Bobby Jindal here. You people could be home watching the House of Representatives count votes tonight. It's so great that you're here. Okay, well, so Jason took me down, introduced me to the late Bob Wilkinson, who, if any of you know him, you realize the most eccentric radio owner in the history of radio. He was a curmudgeon. He was, a collector of first edition vinyl dating back to the 20s. He had the best microphone collection of anyone I've ever known. He was just an amazing guy, but he was a curmudgeon, and he paid us $1.60 an hour, swore that he'd raise me to $2 an hour, and never did. So I had to end up selling ads to supplement. So Jason said, Bob, Kenny has had 5 years of radio experience, which is more than any of the other substitutes. And he really went to bat for me, and Bob's like, well, okay. And I never thought I'd hear from Bob again. A lot of this is in the book, the build-up to this. This is a chapter called Me on the Air, with a question mark, because I couldn't believe it. It's been my dream. When I was 8 years old, had a birthday party that my friends Kenny and David were definitely at, because we gave out Davy Crockett coonskin caps as party favors. I had fallen in love with East Coast radio. I grew up in New Jersey, and I was listening to Peter Tripp on WMGM and Murray the K on WINS and Scott Muni. Eventually, they gave way to people like Jonathan Schwartz and Pete Fornatale, and I always wanted to be on the radio, and I actually told my parents and all the people at my birthday that day that I was going to be a disc jockey. And you flash forward 15 years, and I'm in Boulder, earning absolutely nothing and going to Talagis every night, and all of a sudden I'm on the radio. So Joe Garagiola was recycling a trite anecdote during Saturday's Major League Baseball game of the week when the phone rang. "Didn't anyone tell you were supposed to take over for me at noon?" the crotchety voice asked. It had only been 3 days since Bob Wilkinson buried my license on the bottom of the substitute stack. "No, this is the first I've heard of it." "Well, get down here. Your show started 3 minutes ago." I was stunned, but I had enough wits about me to guzzle the last half of the 16-ounce brew that I had been sipping leisurely. I raced the Acoma line to Pearl Street, and that's before there was a mall. You could park right in front of the station. Station's at 1410 Pearl Street, and was face-to-face with Wilk by 12:10 p.m. He methodically ran down the responsibilities for my 6-hour shift. The commercials are on reel-to-reel, run 2 live PSAs an hour, don't pot up the vocal mic past 2 o'clock or you'll overmodulate, like I'm sort of doing that now, log meter readings now and at the end of your shift, give legal IDs at the top and bottom of every hour, and keep your language within FCC standards. This pot operates turntable number 1, this is for turntable number 2, this is the preview headphone jack so you can listen to yourself in queue. Remember to back up all albums a third of a revolution for the best segues, and you answer the phone too. If I get any calls, I'm out of town until next Friday. Any questions? No, I'm all set, I said, feigning supreme confidence. Again, without saying goodbye, Wilkinson turned and descended the 30 stairs that separated the second-floor studio from the street. He had left a Tom Paxton album tracking, and I estimated it had about 15 minutes to go. Everything Bob Wilkinson just said to me might as well have been in Portuguese. I had no idea what to do next. I surveyed the room with its 10,000 vinyl LPs surrounding a console with dozens of toggle switches, mute buttons, knobs, and directional arrows. I skimmed through a fat operations manual, but I wasn't a cryptographer rather, and couldn't decipher any of the codes. I stared in disbelief at the archaic tape recorders mounted on a steel chassis behind the announcer's chair. I hadn't threaded a reel-to-reel since my Wollensack days in 5th grade. Ready or not, I was about to begin my radio career. I felt a confusing combination of giddiness and panic. My childhood dream of becoming a disc jockey had come true, but I had to learn to fly without a co-pilot. So that led to 36 years on and off on the radio in Boulder. My whole 12 years, I was on one station or another. I was on KRNW closed in 1977. It was sold to the Greenlee family, former mayor of Boulder, Bob Greenlee, who I remember Bob Wilkinson saying to me, "I got $290,000 for this piece of crap." I ripped that mother off. And Bob Greenlee, of course, turned around 15 years later and sold it for $27 million. So he was set, and Bob Wilkinson, went on and collected microphones. And I felt really bad. He passed away a few years ago at the age of 82, and he was just a wonderful, not a wonderful person, but an inspiration on so many levels. The guy was really a radio guy. So then I went on to KBCO, which I'll tell you about in a little bit, and KGNU. And then moved out to San Diego in 1983. I thought my radio career was over, but started a show called Music Without Boundaries, and that had a nice 14-year run. That was on 5 stations in San Diego, so that wasn't the end. What I wanted to say about the book in general is that it's a love story about a life devoted to music. And 40 years, 4 months, and 20 days with Helen Roy.
It's okay, Kenny.
My wife.
Yay!
20 years, I'm sorry, I miscounted. 41 years, 4 months, and 20 days. I've been with my stepchildren, Paul and Nicole, who are here tonight since Nicole was 7 and Paul was 6. And now they're not quite pushing Social Security. they're getting up there, and you know, they've been such an important part of my life. I'm so glad they're here today.
We love you.
I promised them I wouldn't embarrass them and read about them, but when you read the book, you'll learn more about Paul, Nicole, and Helen than you've ever known. It's a heart on my sleeve kind of memoir. Off My Rocker also, chronicles how I fell in love with rock and roll, and I mentioned earlier that I listened to East Coast radio and just the bug bit me. I'm 65 now; it's still bugging me really hard. And, the great thing that happened about having a radio show like at KRNW and just being able to play whatever music you wanted to, talk however you wanted to. I mean, I became so famous for my self-indulgence. If the weather was snowy, I was on from 6 to 10 a.m., and if it was snowing hard outside, I would get on the air at 6:50 and say, if you're waking up now to go to work, forget it, just go back to bed. And so I built up this whole persona of, just playing what I wanted, talking what I wanted. And there were several newspaper and magazine editors that were in the audience, and they called me up and said, have you ever written anything? And I said, yeah, I wrote sports for my high school paper, and they said, well, you should write about music. And the first person to call me was Wayne Robbins, who was the means and media editor of the Colorado Daily, and he assigned me a John Fahey concert review at Tulagi. And I went to the show, I reviewed it, I had John Fahey on the radio the next morning playing live. I went to a party with him that night, and I said, wow, I can double dip, and I can have radio interviews and parlay them into newspaper articles. And then the editor of the Straight Creek Journal, Stephen Fair, who is also here tonight, my second editor, 42 years ago, called me up and said, I'd like you to do record reviews, features, write anything you want. And I used the F word so many times, and Stephen never edited it out. He was really encouraging about my writing. And then Barbara Lou Cohen at the Daily Camera hired me in 1976 to become the first ever rock critic for the Daily Camera, a job that I held for 4.5 years before I was fired for insubordination. So they all convinced me that I could write articles, and I ended up writing about 1,000 articles for about 17 publications. I think I made a total of $1,500 on those, something like that. Yeah, I mean, I think at the camera, one of the reasons I got fired was I tried to get a raise from 25 a column to 35, and they said, there are a lot of people that would do this for free. I ended up writing a song about that, by the way, about working for free in Boulder with my band. But anyway, in the book, I'm not going to read from them tonight, but you'll read them when you go home. I interviewed Bill Murray on the radio at KBCO for like 3 hours during the 1978 Super Bowl run by the Broncos, and Bill Murray was taking questions from the audience, and the topic was, what's wrong with our Broncos? And G. Brown actually taped it for me, and I still have the cassette. I have to do it digitally. Elvis Costello on his first tour in San Diego playing the UMC Ballroom. When he was an angry young punk, it's almost hard to remember that he ever had that persona. He was on the radio with me at KBCO. Graham Parsons broke a microphone in half because he was so out of it at KRNW. Chuck Morris set me up with interviews with Tom Waits 3 or 4 times when he was just breaking in, and then finally when he was famous. All these things are in the book. I'm amazed that I got to break bread with people like that. But radio was my real love, and I went to KBCO, and I was there for maybe close to a year. I did Sunday nights, and they tried to break me in doing the format, but I had never done a format before. I wasn't good as a team player taking orders, so I didn't last too long there, but it was good because my friend Glenn Gerber, rest in peace Glenn, hired me as one of the co-founders of KGNU in 1978, and yeah, we dug the transmitter out east of town, and it was just really a grassroots thing, and KGNU is now 35 years old, and I was fortunate enough to be on the air with Leland Rucker the other day talking about the good old days that most of you have experienced, not all of you, but it wasn't all that it was meant to be. KRNW spoiled me. I mean, it had a 1,000-watt signal, the antenna was hanging out the back window. It was just, you know, it had a 5-mile radius here and 3 miles there. You know, KBCO was much more professional, has become a juggernaut in the AAA format. And KGNU, 35 years old, it's unbelievable. But when I started there, it wasn't so great. I'll read a little piece from that. When I did my first radio show in 1971 at the age of 23, I discovered what a mighty cloud of joy was. I was walking on one. But then radio changed and my enthusiasm for the medium started to wane. After 6 years of reveling and being a freeform DJ in Boulder, playing whatever I wanted at KRNW, my new bosses at KBCO instituted a conservative card catalog format with a limited playlist. Progressive radio, as we knew it, was categorically being eliminated from coast to coast. I tried to adapt but failed miserably at my full-time audition. Every time I would intentionally deviate from the format and play a song of my choice, the Big Brother program director would call me from home or race down the hallway from his office and insist that I follow the rules. I couldn't, so in late 1977 they exiled me to Sunday nights where I happily presented a 6-hour show called Hot Off the Press that afforded me the programming freedom I'd been used to at KRNW. 6 months earlier, when I was recruited, 6 months later, when I was recruited to be a co-founder of Boulder's first public radio station, KGNU, it was the closest I'd ever come to being born again. I envisioned a world of complete artistic freedom and no commercials. Alas, the station hadn't been on the air for a week before I got called up to the carpet for my questionable song selection. After one of the afternoon shows, the program director, development director, and general manager requested a formal powwow with me. Don't take this the wrong way, the program director said, but you play far too much rock and roll. Rock music has no place on public radio. In fact, nothing in 4/4 time should be on our airwaves. Seriously. I think you should be playing a lot more jazz and classical music. I love them both, but it's not what I played. The development director, whose job was to procure national grants and local business contributions, was less subtle. I can't attract underwriters to a station that plays Bruce Springsteen and the Sex Pistols, although the GM had been well aware of my rock and roll pedigree when I was at KRNW and KBCO, and ostensibly hired me because of my trend-setting reputation. It was his job to quash any dissension, and he asked me to tone it down a little. The four of us had a heated but constructive debate. I was the oldest person in the room at age 30, but it felt like my parents were castigating me. The next day I began my show with Lou Reed's Street Hassle. Some of you know what that song is. An X-rated symphonic rock opus with depraved lyrics and a somewhat cacophonous melange of classical cellos, doo-wop shalalas, and an uncredited spoken word cameo from public radio enemy #1, Bruce Springsteen. It's an 11-minute masterpiece, and by the time it reached the halfway mark, my flustered colleagues had surrounded me at the console. They insisted that I segue immediately into something more palatable, like Duke Ellington's Take the A Train. I refused, and our disagreements intensified. So that's, and that goes on a little bit, you know, more stories about how difficult I was to get along with. But KGNU bless him, 35 years old, just fantastic. I'm so proud to have been one of the people that started that station. So.